So Philip, we're in a very interesting time right now with the vaccinations and people are thinking about going back to the office. I think it's a good time to kind of look back. What has happened over the last 14, 15 months? If you look back at Julius Baer over the last 15 months, what have you learned? What are the key insights that you have gained?
Not sure if it's a good time to look already back. I think for that we still have a bit of forward momentum. Even though you're right, I think it's probably the last mile in the tunnel, even though they always feel like the longest.
That's true.
What have we learned? We've learned a lot of things. We've learned how resilient we are as a company. We've learned how flexible our people are and how well they can manage in different situations. We've learned how good actually our IT, our technology is, which was a bit of a surprise. Right. I think no one thought that we could go into a lockdown and remote mode just within a few weeks at the beginning of last year, and it was possible. Yeah. We learned that our clients were following the new mode in a completely straightforward and open way. We learned that we can do great business, that we can do a lot of transformation. We learned how to use WebEx. I think okay. We learned a lot of things.
Yeah. Now say a little bit more about the people flexibility. Can you give a little bit more of the examples on what especially stood out?
I think when you're running an organization, obviously you're relying on your org chart, on the regular meetings, on the proximity, on the floor design that should bring certain functions together. And this is how things have been running for many years. And you almost couldn't imagine that differently. And then you throw people into a completely different environment, into a completely different setup. And you find out that actually the organization starts to self-organize and does that almost within a logical second. I've been amazed by the quality of our team heads, of our group heads, of our entire management cascade, where people have embraced this new setup just like that. And they've been making the best out of it. They've maintained full operational readiness with maybe a few hours in between the working from home and the sorting out the technicalities. But Julius Baer had not been interrupted during those weeks. And from a management approach that was built on proximity to a management approach that was built on something else, this has been a completely seamless experience. And everyone from top management down to all our employees have just embraced the situation. This was amazing.
What made that possible?
I think it starts with the DNA. I like to think. Obviously, you need the technicalities and the process and the support and everything, but it starts with the DNA. And I think what has made it easier for us was that Julius Baer always had a DNA where people, individuals, take responsibility, where people do not just fill their little boxes and try to do their job, walking in at 8 and walking out at 5. But actually where job profiles are much larger, are much deeper, are much more complex and interwoven. And so where people are used to managing dependency, but also like that. And obviously that was an important prerequisite to manage a very dynamic situation. Then I think it's also a company where people still know each other. This also made it easier because there was this implicit element of trust that was just woven through the organization. And yes, even though we didn't see each other, we knew who was on the other side of the line and so could continue to operate. By the way, that's even more important right now after 15 months when I have not been able to travel to our Asian operations during that entire time. But still, this is working at a very high effectiveness and efficiency. And so I think we had a few prerequisites in place that made this transition easier. Other companies have gotten there too, but I think this was in Julius Baer's DNA.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that investments companies have made in the culture before the pandemic are paying off big time in how people act during the pandemic, right?
Have you seen any company where it was almost impossible to get into pandemic mode, or have they all made it somehow?
I think it's more they all make it somehow, but some with more falling and getting up than others. Okay. And I think the culture and the trust is the difference. Mm-hmm. I really like your comment about self-organizing, because my guess is you knew very little of what to actually do when this hit you, right? So if it all had been dependent on a hierarchical frame, and I think those are the companies that struggled, because then you're just sitting back and waiting for the top to say, okay, Philip, go do this. Right? I think those are the companies that struggled. The more hierarchical you are, I think the harder it is to react to a crisis. And I like this concept you said, self-organizing. I guess you don't mean do whatever the hell you like, huh?
No, not quite.
Right. So what keeps the self-organizing then also business-focused, Julius Baer focused at the same time?
I think having a clear objective, having a clear view on how the business works is a very important piece. I always tend to say this with a smile. Yes, we have a complex business, but Julius Baer also has a simple business. Why? We are focused on serving high net worth and ultra high net worth private clients. And yes, of course, there is a ton of combinations and permutations on the solution side, on the geographies, on the interactions, but I still think that our business is a business that can be understood by our employees. And not just, again, in their own little boxes and in their own product areas, but people tend to understand also the interfaces and where their work connects to. And I think it was that understanding that enabled people to continue operating in a very smooth way moving forward. Maybe turning a bit of a disadvantage into an advantage. Had you asked me 3 years ago, where does Julius Baer have potential to evolve? One of the areas I would always have mentioned is we could professionalize or industrialize some of our processes, where sometimes we improvise, sometimes we reinvent the wheel. In normal times, obviously this is a hindrance. In times like this, it is a strength because people know how to improvise. And we'll have to find a balance moving forward.
In terms of moving forward, right, I think what allowed them to have those interfaces, you said it yourself, is the proximity that existed before. So how do you keep this self-organizing part alive as there's, maybe not right now, but increasingly a return to proximity? Is there a chance we fall back into old habits?
I think that's always the biggest danger, isn't it? I think human beings always gravitate back to old habits. That's the natural course of things. And so our role right now as leaders is to bring in the right amount of energy and disruption so that they can't do that. And setting parameters in a way that it's just not possible to go gravitate back to the old normal. And one way of doing it obviously is by telling to all our people across the organization, managers or not, that we want to give them a degree of flexibility moving forward, and which will absolutely prevent any manager from having all of their people back in the office. They would raise their hand and complain. So with that started, obviously, then we need to work very hard in finding the right way, in finding the right new normal. And frankly, I don't have the answers to that yet. I think it's going to be a process. It is going to be a journey on which the organization will discover what to make of the new freedoms, what to embrace and what to not embrace, maybe even to further develop the tools that we have now started to discover. I wouldn't say that after 15 months, we're, for example, proficient in really using hybrid digital physical interaction.
Sure.
We're just scratching at the surface. And having just an iPad somewhere on a desk with an expert waving, that's not integrating the two worlds yet. So there's a lot of journey still to be done. But I think we as a company need to create a space to experiment with that and to get better.
Yeah. Actually, what I picked up on, you said we don't have the solution yet. I would very much say the solution does not exist, right? But we have to have multiple solutions. So that's also why I like this comment about the self-organizing. Maybe the answers don't need to come from you or the EB. And maybe actually you would, maybe even you said intentionally disrupt, I like that, to make sure managers don't go back to their old habits. Maybe you could have almost like a competition of, flexibility solutions. So you spur that on.
Which has a few dangers of its own. I don't think I want to have people go completely overboard with what's the weirdest kind of process setup that you can imagine. I'm sure we would have a lot of creativity on that. No, but I think that there's the bottom up element is very key, and the front to back element is key. And this is why I think it's so timely that we're working on agile right now, and not as a buzzword. I mean, this is not. Everyone wants to become agile in today's days. We've defined it in a very simple way as becoming much more focused on outcomes than on inputs. So we want to get over the river, but we don't tell people to build bridges. That's one element. The second, and that's the super key element, is we want to work front to back. We want to get out of the functional silos. We want to put the people who really need to get things done end to end, together in a room, ideally with the clients, and then let them find a way. And obviously do this at a much higher pace than in the classical waterfall approach. And obviously, that's the third element with a proper economic objective in mind, either avoiding cost or driving revenues. But this middle part, this end-to-end element, and having the real practitioners in the room, I think that's key to unlock the potential of those future processes.
So if I put those two elements together, right, agile and not falling back into old habits, they both go hand in hand. But my guess is you've probably found not everybody is ready for this. There's probably been some revelations throughout the last 16 months about who can lead in this new world and who cannot. Have you noticed that as well?
Yes, we have. And I think there's, as always, when change happens, and change happens all the time. I mean, we've changed hugely over the last 20 years. You have to do a few things. You have to bring in people who can drive that change and who can maybe epitomize it sometimes, who can show the way and lead the way. Then you have to help the existing people go on the road and go and try it. You have to create an environment where they can make mistakes. You have to teach them, to coach them. You have to build opportunities of apprenticeship. But you also have to apply a degree of force to the system, where you have to tell people you have no choice. This is the direction that we're going. And as bad as it is, but you might lose some people on that way, and as a company you have to accept it. And I think that's, taking these three elements together, we'll get there.
I would almost say if you don't make decisions about who is not part of it, you may not be going far enough, right?
That's true for most changes, isn't it?
Right,
I think if you never lose a client, if you never lose a single employee upon a decision you make, maybe your decisions have been of marginal relevance.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So when you look forward, how is the bank going to be different from what it was pre-COVID?
I think the bank is changing itself year after year. And I've been joking to some members of the press saying, but actually not joking, by saying that if we were doing still today the same things as we did 20 years ago, we would be out of business and obsolete. And we would make no more revenues. Yeah. And that's absolutely true. I think looking at the pace of evolution behind those static walls, banks always look like being built forever, but behind those walls there's so much change happening. Moving from a model which was based on custody and brokerage to a model that was based on advice and that was based on portfolio management and ultimately on holistic advice, taking into account an even broader circle of opportunities. And this evolution has been in full swing prior to the pandemic and continues to push forward. I think the COVID has not that much been a discontinuity, it has been an accelerator of change. It has accelerated the fire. It has brought us some new capabilities, some new tools, some new possibilities, but the bigger change is actually happening on a longer timeline. And so I do hope that in a few years' time, Julius Baer will have moved on and will have evolved. And probably we'll be looking back in 25 or 28 and saying, wow, the pandemic was a pivotal moment to accelerate some of those changes. But it was not the harbinger of change in principle.
But I really like the point about acceleration, right? Because a lot of the innovations I've seen at Julius Baer existed already before, but somehow were not being implemented fully, whether it's electronic signatures, whether it's on video onboarding of client, they all existed before.
And an interesting dimension of change was actually the fact that people had time to focus on change. That is what I found, looking back now 50 months, and I'm not sure if it's absolutely true, but I sense it is. In a normal business life, I think all management layers and obviously also the employees are in a given routine. In a routine where you spend time with clients, where you spend time with counterparties, where you're traveling, where you're moving, and where you have a finite amount of time doing things on top. And change is typically a thing on top.
Yeah.
With the pandemic, we completely changed that. Obviously, there have been many, many client touch points, but they become much more effective. So instead of a 3-hour business meeting over lunch, we ended up having 10 minutes calls, achieving, by the way, the same or more. And that left a lot of space in the room, in the day, to actually drive transformation. And if I look at the pace of transformation that we have been able to manage after the strategy announcement at the beginning of last year, if I look at the bandwidth that we've developed as an organization to drive change in different areas at the same time, this has been just phenomenal. And in that sense, I believe a lot of acceleration has come from the ability to focus.
I like that point a lot, and I think a lot of other companies are coming to the same conclusion, right? Personally, I'm a little bit afraid that the emphasis goes too much to efficiency. And I hear part of that, not totally, but part of that in your answer. Less office space, less travel, fewer entertainment, we don't have the 3-hour lunches. Fantastic, right? I'm just afraid it may go at the cost of effectiveness in the long run. So how do you look at that balance between the two?
I think it's a pendulum, and the pendulum will swing back. That's very clear, especially in a profession like ours that is so much centered around human beings and clients. I think we all know, not just intellectually, but also in our hearts, that we need to find the right balance between the two. And our clients are helping us guide the way. I mean, they will tell us, and they tell us that it's great to have those quick chats and get things done. And they would not expect us to show up on their doorsteps 5 times a year, but I'm really looking forward to seeing you again as soon as you can travel.
Right,
so
okay.
there is pull coming also from that side. I'm absolutely not afraid that we will not find the right balance. And but we need to do it in a premeditated way. I think it's also important to set the KPIs the right way. And you mentioned office spaces. I jokingly said, I don't want to have any office space saving in the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know what's in 28, but right now that's not the point. This is not about cost reduction. It's about finding the right way of doing things with the new means that we have. And through such simple things, you can actually create boundary conditions that the pendulum ends in a reasonable territory.
So it doesn't go all the way to the other side, right?
Yeah.
So, and what about quality of life, right? Because I think of it usually as like a 3-legged stool. You got efficiency, you have effectiveness, and quality of life. And quality of life has 2 elements: quality of life in the organization and quality of life at home. And I think, there's been a huge trade-off, right? Some people actually, I was with people from Singapore saying, finally I could have dinner with my family when they had young children, right? So how do you see the balance of all 3? Because right now we were talking about the balance of efficiency, effectiveness. And you gave some hints already around that flexibility, but...
I think that's hugely individual, especially the family part. I think there are some who would say it's great that I can have dinner every day with my family. There may be others saying I have to have dinner with my family now every day. I believe there are different camps in that field. Where it has suffered is obviously in corporate life. And I think there is an incredible value in social gatherings, ranging from the coffee chats informally at 10:05 a.m. to the big town halls where people actually mingle in different ways for the hours after the formal speeches, which are borderline irrelevant, to the Christmas parties, which are just a great way also of rewarding people for all the hard work that have been put in. And I know that most of our people are missing strongly that side of the equation. And we're working hard to bring that back as soon as we can. A good example is our Diamond Circle. That's our, let's say, top relationship managers across the group who have been best performing in the last year, who are part of that circle. A great group that we also use for contribution on the content side and have regular conversations with. We were not able to organize a physical gathering of the Diamond Circle last year in 2020, and when I was talking to all our members now in the first quarter of this year, and I had individual calls with each and every one of them, I got sort of a 90% feedback, please let the next event be a physical event.
Right.
And we're working very hard to make that happen.
Julius Baer, one of the things I really like is the distinction you can make between personalized and personal in your business, right? And personalized is all the high-tech firms, and we can personalize a lot of things to you, kind of like Amazon. You know, people like you read these books, so order them, right? And you've had to fight against that. What have you learned about, and I imagine a lot actually, that's why I'm asking the question, about how important the personal side of the business is and how you combine that in this more virtual world?
I think I've learned how strong the personal connection underneath our business really is. And we've seen this from the reactions of our clients. We've seen this from the fact that we attracted substantial new money from our existing clients who were using the trust that they had in us and building on that trust to entrust us even more. We saw this from an unbroken string of referrals that happened actually throughout the pandemic, where many clients introduced friends and family to us in a time when trust became even more important.
Right.
And so I think the strength, may have discovered the real value of that underlying trust base. And it has now carried us more than a year. Obviously, I think also trust needs to be renewed. And there are these psychological theories that after not seeing each other for 2 years, 3 years, sort of the trust curve will also start to diminish.
Yeah, sure.
And so I definitely hope that we can start renewing some of this. But yes, this is an absolute a key element of our business. Still, we need to have both. I mean, it doesn't work just one without the other. You cannot just be a personal, trust-based business, a personal business, without the ability to personalize, without the ability to modularize and to bring the best solutions to our clients. Because in these pandemic times, there was also a discrimination between those who did well and did less well in terms of investments, in terms of advice, in terms of solutions, products, and clients will also remember that the simple performance side of things when they will make their choices in the years to come.
So we've talked a lot about the bank and going forward. What about you? What has been your experience? I remember we met in May. In May, you couldn't wait to go travel and meet people. So partly it must have been a frustrating year for you since you wanted to go out. But what have you learned about yourself?
You learn that there are always ways. I think I've always been a resilient person in the sense that I don't spend too much time thinking about what might have been and what could be different. I think I've always been able to accept the reality in which I am and consider the glass half full and move on. And so, yes, I was longing to travel. I'm still longing to travel. I'm still a bit that lion in the proverbial cage. But I've extended the cage, and the cage has been extended with the WebEx wall in my office, with the virtual opportunities I have at home, and I use this in a very conscious manner. I sometimes decide to do a work from home day where I do virtual interaction just because I can do it in a different setting than here in the office.
Right.
Obviously, I'm talking a lot on the phone. I'm using all kind of digital media, and I would never have expected to do so many TV recordings as I've done in the last 15 months, which obviously is a one-way communication, but it's still communication. And we've tried to make the most of it. Yes, looking forward, obviously, to recombining the two, to finding a balance. I'm mindful that the way there is going to be hard. Probably the hardest is to combine now the emerging physical contacts with still the requirements of the virtual world. So the next 6 months are going to be a lot of work. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that next year things will look quite different.
So just to push you a little bit more on the personal side, right? So on the one hand, okay, you're a guy who likes to see the glasses half full. Don't worry about what might have been. But the lessons about being able to trust people, the lessons about people not violating data privacy or data regulations, must have had an impact on how you reflect how you and the EB are providing the leadership for this company, I would imagine.
Yeah, true. Very true. I think it has, there have been insights at all different levels. There has been the very basic things like having been able to spend more time with some of my EXP colleagues than ever before.
Right.
And that was the counterintuitive result of the lockdown. We ended up spending an hour on the phone every day, whereas before we saw each other once every 2 weeks.
Right.
And a different quality, a different depth of interaction. I think I've learned a lot about the people in our organization, but also about our clients. And you've mentioned trust as a word.
Yeah,
I think that's very important. It's something I probably reinforced my trust in people, in the organization, very, very strongly throughout that time. We talked about flexibility, about resilience, about potential. I think I've discovered new ways that are possible and new horizons that are there, that had I stayed within my hamster wheel, I probably would never have tried to look. But as always, I mean, human beings often know what they value most when they miss it. And for me, I think it was also revealing how much I missed some of the finer elements, some of the more social events, some of the personal interactions, some of the fine signs beyond language when you can communicate with someone personally. And maybe I value them much more today than I used to value them before. Same, by the way, for lunches and dinners, which have become a commodity or a nuisance to some point.
Yeah.
And today, how wonderful is it, isn't it?
I know, I laugh because I had the same reaction. For the first couple of months, it was like, great, no program dinners, no program lunches. And then it was like, oh, now I'm missing them. So, well, I was going to shake your hand almost, but
you can. I mean, it's all possible.
But thank you very much. This was great.
Thank
A really
you very
pleasure,
much,
as usual, to talk with you.
My pleasure.